Paul Beckwith, continuing my discussion on this report from the Center for Climate and Security called A Security Threat Assessment of Global Climate Change. And, this report, which just came out in February 2020, talks about, a couple of different warming scenarios, sort of near term and mid to long term, and the risks to society are given as very high to catastrophic. So I'll continue the discussions, and and then towards the end I'll talk a bit about the coronavirus, some of the latest on that, or do that in a separate video if I run out of time in this one. So let me get right back into the report. Okay, so this is the website, the Center for Climate Security, and the Security Threat Assessment of Global Climate Change that I was talking about. So, even in the near-term scenario, 1 to 2 Celsius warming, the risks are much, much greater, high to very high in the southern hemisphere, and medium to high in the northern hemisphere. And then if you look at the medium to long-term scenario, 2 to 4 plus Celsius warming, the threats are, high to catastrophic in the northern hemisphere, and again, even higher, very high to catastrophic in the southern hemisphere. Okay, a much more, a world that is not so, not, a world where there's huge problems, basically. Okay, so like I said, there's a regional and intersecting climate security threat. So it looks at the different regions. So Africa, AFRICOM, and it talks about, the resource stress, disease, migration, violent extremist groups bolstering their number, and things being much, much worse, at 2 to 4 degrees. So it looks at all of the different regions here, and there's a lot of similarities. There's certain things that dominate in the different regions, but there's a lot of similarities, across the board here. We're in a climate emergency. We're heading to a very dire place. We have to slash fossil fuel emissions, and we have to, pull CO2 out of the atmosphere and, cool the planet. Look at solar radiation management techniques. That's mentioned in this report, but not too much. Okay, so, they call for the world to achieve net zero global emissions as soon as possible in a manner that is ambitious, safe, equitable, and well-governed in order to avoid severe and catastrophic security futures. We must climate-proof environments, infrastructure, institution, and systems on which human security depends, build resilience to current and expected impacts. And, the virus is showing us that we don't have resilience. We've gone to a globalization model. One of the big things is there's going to be supply shortages as supply chains are interrupted. So there's lots of things on that. So basically, that's what the report goes into. And, there's a lot of repetition, I find. But it looks at through a lens of security maintenance. The effects of climate change will affect most environmental and social systems on which safety and stability depend. The U.S. National Intelligence Council identified pathways through which climate change will challenge national security interests, including threats to the stability of countries, heightened social and political tensions, adverse effects on food prices and availability, increased risk to human health, the spawning of new diseases and things, negative impacts on investments and economic competitiveness, and potential climate discontinuities and secondary surprises. So secondary surprises, you could label the coronavirus as that. The military has often talked about climate change as being a threat multiplier. Okay, so physical shocks, food, water, and resource stress, extreme weather events, which we're already seeing. Now, it doesn't really mention the jet stream and the Arctic temperature amplification and those impacts, those effects on extreme weather, sea level rise, and social tensions, migration, which we're already seeing. Health. So let's read about health. Climate change will pose serious challenges to human health, mainly by affecting delicate natural systems that make bodies more susceptible to stress and disease. Medical research demonstrates links between warming temperatures and increased vulnerability to heat stress, infectious diseases, extreme events, and pollution. So, lowering, for example, the immune system, making people more susceptible to disease. And it talks about direct adverse health impacts from climate-induced severe weather events like flooding, wildfires, extreme heat, and droughts, and disruptions of health infrastructure, lack of access to care, food, water, and resource stresses affecting nutritional and mental health outcomes, as the impacts become more severe. And spreading, it talks about water, food, and vector-borne diseases, mosquitoes and ticks spreading more diseases, waterborne diseases like cholera, malaria. These health risks will stress the stability of populations, care systems, infrastructure, and societies. Well, we're seeing that now with the coronavirus. There's very little that I've seen that is connecting the coronavirus to climate change. Climate to coronavirus and coronavirus to climate. Very, very little connection, if any. Talks about state fragility and conflict. In an era of fake news, basically reality is hitting hard. The coronavirus will show us that. So, there's different projections, different scenarios. Let's just go down and look at some of the maps here. So again, so these are the details. This is the U.S. combatant commands, areas of responsibilities, these NORTHCOM, SOUTHCOM, etc. Okay, and it looks at the threat assessments. There's a lot of repetition, so it divides it up, and it talks specifically about Africa. It talks about all of the different locations. Okay, CENTCOM, so the Middle East. It talks about areas becoming uninhabitable. Doesn't specifically mention wet bulb temperature, but it says combinations of high temperature. I mean, we're getting warming to 50 Celsius. We've had it in recent years. It talks about it going to even 60 Celsius, with humidity that makes you, it does mention that you basically can't be outside for more than about 6 hours, and then you don't survive because your body's not able to throw off heat. It doesn't give the details, but it does mention that. Stuff I've talked about in many previous videos. And then Europe and the other different regions. Okay, so basically, this is a very important report. This is by the military people, military experts. In combination with the J.P. Morgan report, there's absolutely no excuse for governments to not face the reality of the situation. I mean, we're well past that situation. So, those are the basic ideas of this report. I'd highly recommend that you have a quick look. It's quite a quick read because there's just a lot of there's a lot of repetition in the report, but um, it talks a lot about different things, which I've talked about. But again, this is from a this should have a lot of credibility. This and the J.P. Morgan report. If they don't convince people how dangerous the situation is, then I don't know what will. Okay, so I want to talk a little about the coronavirus, which is not in this report. Okay, but have a look at it. Just Google the title, and you can easily access it. So there's one figure which is, I would say is the most important to look at as far as the coronavirus. This is the Johns Hopkins. So if you go, Google, just Google Johns Hopkins coronavirus map. Okay, and you get this article here, and there's a link, interactive web-based dashboard, and that brings you up to this page here. And this is, you can see it when it was last updated, so it's about 11 now. So at 10/13, 106,000, the global number. It's updated fairly frequently. Okay, it hasn't been, this was when it was last updated. Okay, there's no new update. Okay, so you can see, China, you can see how it's taking off in Europe, you can see what it's like in North America. Now, if we go down to this plot and look at the growth rate, so what sort of growth rate are we looking at in the US or in many other countries? It will vary from country to country. We need this sort of map for all the different countries and then see what countries are doing the best and try to find out why. Now, this jump here, I'm not sure if this is just they tested a lot more people here and registered a lot more cases. We know there was a mutation of the virus from China. It was from China, and the one spreading around the world is more a mutation. But it's interesting that this is leveling off in China. They've taken draconian, quarantine measures, huge measures under the communist system. So, which we can't do. So if you look at mainland China, the cases January 20th were 278, and the cases now, March 7th, March 8th, 80.7K, so 80,700. That's a 45-day spread, and the death rate in China is about, the death rate is, it's about, in China it's about 3,000, right here, close to 3,000, and that's 3.7%. But there's a lot of unreported cases. So if you look at the U.S. Now, for example, the U.S. cases here, 428. So that's close to the Chinese number on January 20th. So we're just delayed by 45 days. So if you look at the U.S., if the U.S. curve follows this curve similarly and other countries, then you would expect by April 21st there'd be about 80,000 cases odd in the U.S. And you can look at each individual country and see, how those numbers pan out. Okay, so this is going to be a huge stress, and this is an emergency situation. I think the World Health Organization, they have to draw a line between, they don't want to panic, the entire world, so they, it's very guarded, very careful language. But there's some epidemiologists who say that 20 to 60% of the globe will eventually be infected by this disease. So we've got a very rough ride ahead of us, and you can estimate the time when that would happen. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.